Hey guys, tonight we are going to tell the story of a king who reigned for 70 years, becoming the longest reigning monarch in his country's history, and for a time in the entire world. We are traveling to the Kingdom of Thailand to learn the story of King Bhumibol Adulyadej. He was a monarch unlike any other, a gifted jazz musician, a talented painter, a patented engineer, and a passionate photographer, who became the deeply loved and revered father of his nation. This is a story about a figure who is held in profound and genuine reverence by the Thai people. So our story tonight will be an especially gentle and respectful one, focusing on his remarkable life and his unique role in his nation's history, told with the quiet and calm approach you've come to expect from this channel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always a huge encouragement. For those of you already settled in, I'd love to see where and when you're listening from. Go ahead and drop your city and local time in the comments. I'm recording this in the very quiet early hours of a Saturday morning, just after 3 a.m., here in Dallas, Texas. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gentle whir of the fan fades. It is replaced not by the sounds of a grand palace, but by the quiet, peaceful sounds of a European lakeside city. The gentle lapping of water against a shore, the distant chime of a clock tower, the soft notes of a jazz saxophone drifting from an open window. Our story does not begin in Thailand. It begins in a comfortable but modest villa in Lausanne, Switzerland, in the 1930s and 40s. Imagine a young man, a teenager, in his room. He is studious, serious, and a little shy. He wears glasses, and he is bent over a diagram of an engine, studying for his science degree at the local university. Later in the evening, he might put down his engineering textbooks, pick up his saxophone, and lose himself in the soulful improvisational music of Duke Ellington or Louis Armstrong, music that he listens to on records he has imported from America. This young man is Prince Bhumibol Adulyadej. He was not born to be king. His older brother, Ananda, was the heir to the throne of Siam. Bhumibol was the quiet, thoughtful, and artistic younger brother, free to pursue his own passions. And his passions were for the modern, the technical, and the artistic. He was fascinated by science and engineering, by the logic of how things work. He was a gifted painter. He was a passionate photographer, his camera a constant companion. And most of all, he loved jazz. It is a wonderful and slightly surreal image. The future king of a devoutly Buddhist nation, a man who would one day be seen as a Dharmaraja, a righteous and almost divine figure, spending his evenings in a quiet room in Switzerland, learning the deeply American, deeply modern, and deeply soulful art form of jazz. He was not just an amateur musician. He was a genuinely talented saxophonist and composer. He would go on to compose dozens of songs, some of which are still beloved standards in Thailand today, and he even had the opportunity to play in jam sessions with legendary American jazzmen like Benny Goodman. This long period of his life, from the age of 6 to 24, was spent in the calm, stable, and democratic environment of Switzerland. He was being raised not as a remote, godlike monarch of an ancient kingdom, but as a modern 20th century man of science and art. Biographers and historians often debate how this Western, scientific, and deeply artistic upbringing influenced his long reign. Did it make him a more pragmatic, modern, and globally minded monarch? One who could bridge the gap between Thailand's ancient traditions and the demands of the modern world? Or did his long period away from his homeland create a certain distance, an almost clinical, observational approach to his own country that would later define his unique style of rule? There was no great prophecy, no divine sign that he was destined for the throne. He was simply the younger brother, a serious young man with a bright, private, and distinctly non-political future planned out for himself. He was going to be an engineer. He was going to play his saxophone. He was going to live a quiet European life. But in June of 1946, that quiet, predictable life was shattered forever. news arrived from the Grand Palace in Bangkok. A terrible, tragic, and history-altering event had occurred. His older brother, the 20-year-old King Ananda Mahadol, was dead, found in his chambers from a single gunshot wound. And in that moment, the quiet, studious life of the young engineering student in Switzerland was over. The news from Bangkok arrives like a thunderbolt from a clear sky, shattering the quiet, predictable peace of the Swiss villa. Your older brother, Ananda Mahadol, the young king of Thailand, is dead. And in that single shocking instant, the life you had planned for yourself, the life of an engineer, a musician, a private citizen, is over forever. The circumstances of your brother's death on the 9th of June 1946 are a profound and enduring national tragedy. He was found in his bed in the Grand Palace, having died from a single gunshot wound to the head. The event remains one of the great, painful mysteries of modern Thai history. The official investigations were complex and deeply controversial, and the true, undisputed facts of what happened in that palace room have never been conclusively established. For you, an 18-year-old prince studying science half a world away, the event is a double devastation. You have lost your beloved older brother, your closest companion, and at the same time you have lost your own future. The duties of the ancient Siamese monarchy, a weight you were never meant to bear, have now fallen directly upon your young shoulders. The Thai National Assembly formally names you his successor. You are now King Bhumibol Adulyadej. Rama IX of the Chukri dynasty. It is one of history's great and tragic ironies. The young man who loved the clear, clean logic of engineering was now at the very center of a mystery that had no clear answer. The man who loved the soulful freedom and improvisation of jazz was now bound by the rigid, thousand-year-old duties of a throne. He had never sought. Your reaction to this life-altering event is a powerful early sign of the kind of monarch you will become. You do not rush back to Thailand to claim your throne. You do not abandon your studies. Instead, with a quiet, methodical pragmatism, you make a crucial change. You inform the University of Lausanne that you will no longer be pursuing your degree in the sciences. You will be switching your field of study to political science, law, and diplomacy. It is a strange and unique beginning for a king. Most monarchs are trained for their role from birth, their education a lifelong preparation for the duties of state. You, on the other hand, have to essentially enroll in king's school after you have already been given the job. You recognize that the skills of an engineer are not the skills of a constitutional monarch, and you deliberately set out to acquire the knowledge that your country will now need from you. Historians and biographers still debate the profound and long-term psychological impact of your brother's death on your reign. Did this sudden, traumatic, and unresolved event instill in you a deep-seated sense of caution, a profound desire for stability, and a personal understanding of the immense dangers of political chaos? It is hard to imagine that it did not help to shape the reserved, serious, and deeply considered public persona you would maintain for the next 70 years. You appoint a regency council to govern in your name, and for the next 4 years, you remain in Switzerland. It is a period of intense preparation. You immerse yourself in the study of governance and law. It is during this time that you meet the woman who will become your lifelong partner, the beautiful and intelligent Sirikit Kityakara, the daughter of the Thai ambassador to France. And you prepare yourself, mentally and intellectually, for the immense weight of the crown that is waiting for you. The young man who loved to take things apart to see how they worked was now tasked with the challenge of helping to put a nation together, of holding it steady through the turbulent decades of the Cold War and beyond. The engineer's mind was now being applied to the complex, unpredictable, and often illogical machinery of a modern state. Finally, in 1950, your studies are complete. The period of preparation is over. You return to Thailand, no longer a student prince, but as the king. You are ready for your formal coronation, and ready to make your solemn, sacred vow to the Thai people. You return to Thailand in the spring of 1950. The quiet, orderly, and familiar streets of Lausanne are replaced by the vibrant, chaotic, and humid energy of Bangkok. It is a city of stunning contrasts, of magnificent golden temple spires rising above a tangled web of bustling river canals, a city that has been waiting for its king to come home. The main event is the royal coronation ceremony, held on the 5th of May 1950, in the breathtaking grandeur of the Grand Palace. Imagine you are there, a silent observer amidst the incredible pomp and ancient ritual. The air is thick with the scent of incense and jasmine flowers. The silence is punctuated by the sound of Brahmin priests and Buddhist monks chanting in ancient, sacred languages. The ceremony itself is a beautiful and complex blend of the two great religious traditions that have shaped the Thai monarchy. It begins with the Buddhist rite of purification. You watch as the young king, dressed in a simple white robe, is anointed with sacred water that has been collected from the great rivers of every province in his kingdom. He is then seated, and the chief Brahmin priest, a figure from an even more ancient tradition, presents him with the 5 items of the royal regalia. These are not just symbols of wealth, they are symbols of the burdens of kingship. There is the great crown of victory, an immense, multi-tiered, diamond-studded crown so heavy it seems a physical weight on the young king's head. There is the sword of victory, representing his duty to protect his people. There is the royal staff, the royal fan and fly whisk, and finally the royal slippers. Then comes the moment that will define his entire reign. The newly crowned king, Bhumibol Adulyadej, now officially King Rama IX, turns to face his subjects and speaks his first, famous oath of accession. His voice is young, but his words are firm. "We will reign with righteousness," he says, "for the benefit and happiness of the Siamese people." It is a simple, direct, and powerful statement. It is not a promise of conquest or glory. It is a promise of service. This vow, spoken by the 22-year-old king on his coronation day, would become the unwavering guiding principle for the next 70 years of his life. You look at the young man at the center of this magnificent ceremony. Weighed down by the heavy gold robes and the enormous glittering crown, the serious, bespectacled king looks less like a triumphant divine monarch, and more like a solemn, dutiful student who has just been given an awesome and almost unbearable responsibility. For a young man who had spent his life studying the precise, logical world of engineering and the free, improvisational world of jazz, this world of ancient, unchanging, and deeply symbolic ritual must have felt strange and overwhelming. He is stepping out of his own life, and into a role that was written for him centuries ago. Historians debate the full significance of this coronation in the context of modern Thai politics. Was it purely a traditional religious ceremony? Or was it also a powerful political act, a reassertion of the monarchy's central and sacred role in the nation's identity, after decades in which the institution had been weakened by military coups and the 1932 revolution that had ended the absolute monarchy? And then the newly crowned king does something completely unexpected, something almost unheard of in the history of monarchies. Shortly after his magnificent coronation, he does not begin his rule. Instead, he and his new wife, Queen Sirikit, return to Switzerland so he can complete his degree. It is perhaps the most unusual thing a new king has ever done. To receive a magnificent, jewel-encrusted crown, swear a sacred oath, and then essentially say, "Thank you very much, but I now need to go back to university and study for my final exams." It was a powerful sign of his methodical, almost academic approach to the role he was about to inhabit. Finally, in 1951, his studies are complete. He returns to Thailand for good, ready to begin his reign. But he returns to a country that is not truly his to command. The government is firmly in the hands of a powerful and entrenched military dictatorship. The young king, for now, is a ceremonial figurehead, a symbol of the nation, but with little real power. His first decade on the throne would be a quiet one, a period of careful learning and patient observation from within the beautiful gilded cage of his new life. You are the king now, a divine figure, Rama IX of the Chakri dynasty. You live with your beautiful wife, Queen Sirikit, in the breathtaking splendor of the Grand Palace in Bangkok. But you soon learn that the palace, for all its magnificent, glittering beauty, is also a gilded cage. The real power in Thailand does not lie with you. You have returned to a nation that is, in the 1950s, firmly in the grip of military rule. A series of powerful army field marshals and generals effectively run the country. The most notable of these is the formidable and authoritarian Field Marshal Surit Thanarat, who cements his power in a coup in 1957. In this system, your role as a young constitutional monarch is almost entirely ceremonial. Your days are filled with a rigid schedule of official duties. You preside over state ceremonies, you bestow titles and awards, you meet foreign dignitaries, and you sign legislation that has been passed by the military government. You are the sacred and revered symbol of the nation, the face on every coin and stamp, but you have very little direct, formal political power. It is a strange and often frustrating position. You are a god-king in the eyes of your people, but you have less real authority than a junior army general. Your life is a series of ribbon cuttings, festival appearances, and the duty of being a silent, dignified presence at official functions. A complex and symbiotic relationship begins to form between the young king and the powerful military government. The military leaders like Surit understand that they need the king. By positioning themselves as the most loyal protectors of the throne, by showing a deep and public reverence for the monarchy, they gain a powerful legitimacy in the eyes of the deeply royalist Thai people, and so they actively begin to elevate the status of the monarchy. It was Field Marshal Surit who was instrumental in reviving many ancient court rituals that had fallen into disuse after the end of the absolute monarchy, such as the practice of prostration in the royal presence. He promoted great national celebrations for the king's birthday. It was a clever political strategy. The more divine, remote, and revered the king appeared, the more legitimate their own military power seemed, as they were the loyal servants who guarded this sacred institution. Historians debate the king's true feelings and level of agency during this early ceremonial period of his reign. Was he a passive, inexperienced young monarch, simply playing the role that the powerful military dictators had assigned to him? Or was he already, in these quiet years, a shrewd and patient political actor, deliberately using the military's promotion of the monarchy to slowly and carefully build the foundation of his own independent moral authority, an authority he would later wield with immense effect? Behind the scenes, away from the endless ceremonies, you use your time to study. You have a scientist's deep and endless curiosity. You study the history of your nation, the tenets of your Buddhist faith. You read reports on agriculture, on irrigation, on public health. You begin to search for a way to fulfill the sacred vow you made at your coronation, the promise to reign for the benefit and happiness of your people. You know you cannot do it through direct political action. You must find another way. You cannot make laws. You cannot command armies. You cannot give overt political speeches. But you can study the chemistry of the soil. You can learn about water management. You can ask why the farmers in the dry, impoverished northeast of your country are so much poorer than the farmers in the fertile central plains. You begin to look for problems that are not political but are practical. And so you make a decision that will change the course of your reign and the very nature of the Thai monarchy forever. You decide to leave the gilded cage. You will step out of the endless, formal ceremonies of the Bangkok palaces, and you will go to see the real Thailand for yourself. In the late 1950s, you and Queen Sirikit embark on your first long journey into the most remote, most neglected, and poorest regions of your kingdom. This is the turning point. This is the moment that the ceremonial king begins his long, patient transformation into the development king and the true father of the nation. And so you leave the cool marble halls of the Grand Palace behind. The royal motorcade travels for hours, leaving the modern, bustling, and wealthy city of Bangkok and entering a different world, the vast, rural heartland of your kingdom. Your destination is Isen, the great northeastern plateau, the poorest and most arid region in all of Thailand. The landscape changes. The lush, green, well-watered fields of the central plains give way to a dry, dusty landscape of subsistence rice farms and small, sun-baked villages of simple wooden houses on stilts. This is a world away from the high politics and endless ceremony of the capital. The arrival of the king in a place like this is an almost unbelievable event. For most of these villagers, it is the first time in their entire history that a reigning monarch has visited their province. They line the dusty roads for miles dressed in their best clothes. As your car approaches, they fall to the ground, prostrating themselves as is the ancient custom, a gesture of the deepest possible respect for their god-king. But you do not remain in the car, a remote figure behind glass. You get out. You walk into the dry, cracked rice paddies, your fine leather shoes sinking into the dust. You sit on the ground on a simple woven mat, with the village elders and old farmers. And you do something that is, for a Thai king, a truly revolutionary act. You listen. King Bhumibol was the first monarch in modern Thai history to systematically travel to every single province of his kingdom, especially the most remote and impoverished regions. These relentless tours, which you and Queen Sirikit would undertake for decades, were the very foundation of the modern Thai monarchy's immense moral authority, and the deep, personal connection between the king and his people. It was a radical change in the style of the monarchy. In the past, the king was a distant, almost divine figure, a resident of the capital. The common person might see your image on a coin or in a temple, but they would never see you in person. You are changing that. You are bringing the monarchy down from the heavens and placing it on the dry, dusty earth of the village. You are not here for a simple photo opportunity. You are here to learn. You ask the farmers about the lack of water, about the quality of their soil, about their debts to the moneylenders. You are a scientist and engineer, and you are collecting data on the real practical problems of your people. Imagine the scene. A poor, uneducated farmer, who has spent his entire life speaking a local dialect, is suddenly face to face with his king. He must try to remember the special, complex, and highly formal words of the royal language, or rakasap, used only when speaking to the monarch. It must be incredibly intimidating. But your genuine, quiet interest and your gentle, specific questions soon put them at ease. Sociologists often debate the impact of these royal visits on the political landscape of Thailand. Were they a purely benevolent and altruistic act of a deeply caring monarch? Or were they also a brilliant political strategy to build a power base for the monarchy that was completely independent of the politicians and the generals in Bangkok, creating a direct, personal bond of loyalty between the king and the vast rural majority of his subjects? It is on these long, hot, and dusty trips that the idea for your life's work is born. You see a problem, a village with no reliable source of water, a community dependent on a single unreliable crop, and your engineer's mind immediately begins to work on a practical, small-scale solution. A small reservoir, a new irrigation channel, a program to introduce a new, more drought-resistant crop. You are not offering grand political speeches or empty promises. You are offering engineering solutions. You look at a dry, cracked rice paddy and you don't just see poverty. You see a problem of hydrology that can be solved. On one such trip, in a particularly parched region of the Northeast, the villagers tell you their greatest problem is the lack of rain. They pray for it, they perform the ancient rituals, but the sky remains a hard, unforgiving blue. The clouds will gather, but they will simply pass overhead, refusing to release their water. You look up at the sky at those very clouds. And you, the young king trained as a man of science, begin to wonder. You begin to form a hypothesis. Perhaps you do not need to pray for the rain. Perhaps with the right knowledge and the right tools you can make the rain. You return to your palace in Bangkok, but your mind is still in the dry, dusty fields of the impoverished Northeast. The image of the cracked earth, the withered crops, and the desperate, hopeful faces of the farmers is imprinted on your memory. And the problem of the rain that will not fall has captured your engineer's imagination. You turn your royal study, a room usually reserved for quiet reading and formal audiences, into a scientific laboratory. You dedicate yourself to the problem with the focus of a research scientist. You gather meteorological textbooks and scientific papers from Europe and America. You study the complex science of cloud formation, of humidity, of atmospheric pressure. You consult with the few trained meteorologists in your country. You are not just a royal patron of a project, you are the project's lead investigator. The problem you learn is not that the clouds passing over the dry regions lack water. They are often full of moisture. The problem is that the water droplets within them are too small and too light to overcome the updrafts and fall to the earth as rain. The clouds are pregnant with water, but they cannot give birth. The solution you hypothesize is a process known today as cloud seeding. The idea is to introduce tiny, microscopic particles or condensation nuclei into the cloud, giving the small supercooled water droplets something to cling to. As the droplets gather on these particles, they will merge, grow larger, and finally become heavy enough to fall as rain. And so you begin to develop your own unique multi-stage technique for making rain. It becomes known as the Royal Rainmaking Project. It is a wonderfully strange and beautiful image. The King of Thailand, a revered semi-divine figure, acting as the nation's chief weatherman. He is not just praying for the rain. He is methodically and scientifically inventing a way to create it. It is the ultimate fusion of his ancient role as a benevolent monarch and his modern training as a man of science. Your patented technique is a three-step process, which you name with a kind of military flair. First is the triggering stage. An airplane flies alongside a promising cloud and releases a chemical like calcium chloride, which helps to absorb humidity from the surrounding air, encouraging the cloud to grow larger and more dense. The second stage is fattening and moving. The plane now flies into the growing cloud and releases other chemicals, like calcium carbide, which produces a heat that pushes the cloud higher, making it cooler, and encouraging the small droplets to begin to merge. By seeding one side of the cloud, the pilot can even steer it, encouraging it to move towards a specific, targeted area. The final stage is the attack. Once the cloud is heavy and laden with moisture, the plane flies through its base and releases a mixture of substances, including urea, dry ice, and simple common salt, which further cools the droplets and gives them the final nudge they need to combine and fall to the earth. The same salt that paid the Roman soldiers and built the Venetian Empire is now being used by the King of Thailand to make it rain. It is a substance with a very long and very versatile career. The first field experiments began in 1969. You yourself would often fly in the small, unpressurized planes to direct the operations and observe the clouds firsthand. The project was a great success. It became a permanent government program, the Royal Rainmaking Department, which still operates today. The scientific effectiveness of cloud seeding in general is still a subject of some debate among meteorologists around the world. How can you ever be certain how much of the rain that falls would have fallen anyway? But for the Thai farmers who stood in their parched fields, looked up at a sky that had been empty for months, and then watched as the king's planes flew overhead and the heavens opened, there was no debate at all. For them it was a miracle. It was a direct, tangible, and life-giving intervention from their king. This is the project that, more than any other, cemented your legend. You were no longer just the king who visited the poor and listened to their problems. You were the king who brought the rain. In a nation of farmers, a nation whose entire existence is dependent on the cycle of the monsoons, there is no more powerful or godlike act. But this project, and the thousands of others you would initiate, were not just a collection of random good deeds. They were all guided by a single, coherent, and deeply personal philosophy. The Royal Rainmaking Project, and the thousands of other small-scale development projects you would initiate over the next several decades, were not just a random collection of good deeds. They were the practical application of a single, deeply held, and coherent philosophy. It was a philosophy born from your scientific training in Europe, your deep understanding of Buddhist principles, and your years of direct, personal observation of the struggles of your people. It is a philosophy that you would eventually give a name to, the sufficiency economy. This was not a complex economic theory like capitalism or socialism. with dense textbooks and complicated graphs. It was, in its essence, a guide to living a balanced and resilient life, both for an individual and for a nation. It was a middle path, rooted in the Buddhist ideal of avoiding the extremes of indulgence on one hand and deprivation on the other. The philosophy was based on three main principles. The first was moderation. This meant living within your means, being mindful of your consumption, and avoiding the trap of unsustainable debt. The second was reasonableness. This meant making decisions with care and prudence, based on sound knowledge and academic principles, not just on fleeting trends or the pursuit of short-term profit. And the third, and perhaps most important, principle was the creation of a self-immunity, or resilience. This was the idea that a family, a village, or a nation should build itself in such a way that it could withstand the shocks and surprises of the outside world, whether that shock was a sudden drop in crop prices, a natural disaster like a flood, or a global financial crisis. It is a philosophy that sounds quiet, simple, and full of gentle common sense. But in a world that is almost always shouting about the need for more growth, more speed, more consumption, the simple, quiet idea of sufficiency, of having just enough to be secure and happy, is a profoundly radical and countercultural idea. You saw the need for this on your long journeys through the countryside. You saw farmers who had been encouraged to plant a single, profitable cash crop for export. When the global price for that crop collapsed, they were left with nothing. You saw families who had taken on large debts to buy modern equipment, and who then lost their land when a single bad harvest meant they could not make their payments. The royal projects were designed to be the antidote to this kind of vulnerability. Instead of funding one massive state-run dam, your projects would support the creation of hundreds of small, locally managed check dams and village reservoirs. Instead of promoting a single export crop, you would encourage farmers to practice integrated farming, to have a fish pond to raise chickens, to grow vegetables for their own family to eat first, and only then to sell the surplus at the market. To test these ideas, you famously turned the grounds of your own royal residence in Bangkok, the Chitralada Palace, into a giant experimental farm. While other monarchs might have filled their palaces with formal gardens and priceless art, you filled yours with demonstration rice paddies, fish ponds, a dairy farm for pasteurizing milk, and laboratories for agricultural research. It must have been a strange sight. In the middle of a huge, modern, traffic-choked city, the king's own palace was a working farm. You were probably the only monarch in the world whose daily concerns included both matters of high state and the proper pH balance of his fish pond. Economists and development scholars have long debated the true nature of the sufficiency economy. Is it a viable, scalable national economic model for a modern, globalized country? Or is it more of a personal moral philosophy, a Buddhist-inspired guide for how individuals and local communities can live a more resilient and meaningful life? For you, the goal was simple. It was to make the great rural foundation of your nation strong, self-reliant, and secure, so that it would not be shaken by the unpredictable winds of the global economy. You were, in your own quiet way, doing for the entire country what a good engineer does for a great building. You were not just concerned with the beautiful decorations on the roof. You were obsessed with the strength and stability of the foundations. You knew that if the foundation was strong, the house could withstand any storm. To do this work, to understand these problems, you needed to see them for yourself. And on your thousands of journeys into the countryside, you were famous for always carrying with you the tools of a modern scientific observer. As you, the king, traveled the length and breadth of your country for decades, a powerful and enduring public image began to form. In the thousands of official photographs and films that documented these journeys, two simple, practical objects are almost always with you. They become the defining symbols of your unique, hands-on style of monarchy. The first is a map, and the second is a camera. Imagine the now iconic scene, an image that has been reproduced millions of times in Thai homes and shops. You are kneeling on a dusty path in a remote village. Before you, a large topographical map is spread out on the ground. You are pointing to a specific contour line, a river, a valley, and gathered around you, sitting or kneeling on the same humble earth, is a group of old, weathered farmers listening intently as you speak. For most people, a map is a tool for finding your way when you are lost. For you, the map was a tool for understanding. You used it to trace the path of a stream to find the perfect location for a new village reservoir. You used it to understand the patterns of flooding that plagued a particular valley. The map was your blueprint of the nation, the scientific starting point for any potential solution. The other object, almost always seen hanging around your neck, was your camera. You were a genuinely accomplished and passionate photographer, and your camera was not a hobby or an accessory. It was a scientific instrument. You took thousands upon thousands of photographs of the land, of the irrigation channels you were planning, of the faces of the people you met. It was your tool for observation, for documentation, for visual note-taking. This was a brilliant piece of public relations, but it was also completely authentic. The camera around your neck was a powerful symbol. It showed your people that you were not just a king who looked, but a king who saw. You were an observer, a data gatherer, a man who believed that to truly solve a problem, you must first see it clearly and from every possible angle. These were the tools of the man you were trained to be, the scientist, the engineer. You were applying the methodical, evidence-based approach you learned at the University of Lausanne directly to the ancient, practical problems of rural Thailand. Your passion for engineering was not just a symbol. You were a true inventor king. In addition to your famous patent for the royal rainmaking technique, you held patents for several other ingenious and practical inventions. One of the most famous was for a low-cost, paddle wheel-based water aerator, a simple device that could be placed in polluted canals and ponds to improve the water quality. You even developed your own formula for an alternative biofuel, a mixture of diesel and refined palm oil. It is a rare thing for a monarch to hold a patent. Most kings are more concerned with matters of succession than with the optimal design of a wastewater aerator. But your mind was always working on practical problems. You were perhaps the only king in history who could have also fixed your broken lawnmower. Sociologists and media scholars debate the immense power of this carefully cultivated public image. The constant depiction of the king as a hard-working, thoughtful, and scientific development king, disseminated through the state-controlled media for decades, became a central pillar of modern Thai national identity. It was the foundation of the monarchy's immense moral authority. The image was powerful because it was clear. While the politicians in Bangkok were often seen as being engaged in corrupt and divisive power struggles, the king was seen as being above it all, out in the countryside, with his map and his camera, quietly and selflessly doing the real work of the nation. This is how you truly became the father of the nation. Not just through the ancient rituals of the crown, but through this deep, personal, and decades-long demonstration of practical care. But this immense moral authority, this deep well of public trust and affection that you built up through years of quiet, patient, and practical work, was not just an end in itself. It was a form of power. And in the turbulent and often violent world of Thai politics, it was a power that your nation would desperately need. The world of practical problems, of droughts and soil erosion, was about to be eclipsed by a world of political crisis. And you would be called upon to use the authority you had so carefully and so patiently earned. For the first 2 decades of your reign, you have carefully and patiently built your moral authority, focusing on the quiet, practical work of development, while leaving the loud and often messy work of politics to the military generals who run the government. But in the early 1970s, a new and powerful force begins to stir in Thailand, a force that will challenge this stable, if undemocratic, arrangement, and that will ultimately force you to choose a side. The new force is the nation's youth. A generation of university students, larger, more educated, more globally aware, and more politically engaged than any before, is growing increasingly frustrated with the rigid, authoritarian military dictatorship that has ruled the country for the past decade. This regime, led by a powerful trio of military strongmen, has abolished the constitution, dissolved parliament, and banned all political parties. Throughout 1973, the tension builds. Student groups organize small, peaceful protests, demanding a return to democratic rule. The final spark comes in early October, when the government arrests a group of 13 student activists for the simple act of handing out leaflets calling for a new constitution. The reaction is immediate and unprecedented. What began as a small protest demanding the release of the activists quickly swells into something much, much larger. Hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands of students and ordinary citizens begin to gather at Thammasat University and the Democracy Monument in the heart of Bangkok. It is a new and unfamiliar sight for the country. For years, politics has been the exclusive business of generals and old men in smoke-filled rooms. Now, the children of the nation are in the streets, peacefully but forcefully demanding a voice in their own future. The student-led uprising of October 1973 was a pivotal moment in modern Thai history. Over the course of one dramatic week, the protests grew until nearly 500,000 people filled the streets of the capital, the largest popular demonstration the country had ever seen. Imagine you are there, an observer in the crowd. The atmosphere is not angry or violent. It is hopeful and almost festive. Students give passionate speeches, they sing songs, and they march peacefully, holding signs that demand democracy. And everywhere you see another symbol held high alongside the national flag, the official portrait of the king. This is the great, complex dilemma you now face. The military government, which you are constitutionally bound to support, claims to be ruling in your name, to be protecting the nation and the monarchy from the chaos of communism and protest. But the protesters in the street, the ones defying that very government, are also claiming your support. They carry your image as a symbol of the true, just, and righteous nation they are fighting for. The military leaders are men of a different generation. They see the world in terms of order, discipline, and stability. They look at this massive, peaceful crowd, and they do not see a call for democracy. They see chaos, a threat to the established order, and the dangerous influence of outside, communist ideas. Historians debate the primary causes of the 1973 uprising. Was it purely an idealistic, student-led movement for democratic freedom? Or was it also fueled by secret, internal rivalries within the military and the political elite, with some factions quietly encouraging the protests as a way to weaken the ruling clique of the tyrannical trio? As the week of protests continues, you remain in your palace, watching, listening, and weighing your options. Both sides, the students and the generals, are looking to you, the great moral center of the nation, to act. The pressure to intervene is immense. You are caught in a terrible position, a father figure caught between his two feuding children. The crisis finally reaches its breaking point on the evening of October 13th. After a day of tense negotiations, the government agrees to release the arrested activists and to promise a new constitution within a year. The student leaders, believing they have won, declare the protest over and ask the great crowd to disperse. But the crowd is too large, too energized, to simply go home. As the thousands of protesters begin to move away from the university, trying to make their way home, they find their path blocked by the police and the army. In the confusion and the tension of the pre-dawn hours of October 14th, a single fateful shot is fired, and the peaceful protest is about to turn into a tragedy. The sound of that first shot in the tense, pre-dawn darkness of October 14th, 1973, is the spark that ignites the powder keg. The fragile peace shatters. Panic erupts in the great crowd of students who are trying to disperse. And the military, seeing the surge of panicked movement as a renewed threat, responds with overwhelming and brutal force. The day that follows is one of the most tragic in modern Thai history. It is not our purpose here to dwell on the graphic details of the violence, but to understand the quiet, somber atmosphere of a city at war with itself. The streets of Bangkok, particularly around the Democracy Monument and Thammasat University, become a scene of terrifying chaos. Unarmed student protesters, who just hours before had been singing songs and calling for peace, are now faced with the full force of the military. Tanks roll through the streets. Helicopters fire down from above. and soldiers use live ammunition against their own people. The students, in their desperation, fight back with whatever they can find: rocks, stones, and makeshift gasoline bombs. Barricades are built from burned-out buses. A thick black smoke from burning buildings hangs over the city. This was not a battle between two armies. It was a violent and tragic confrontation between the armed forces of a nation and its own children. The streets around the Democracy Monument, a place built to celebrate the ideals of freedom, had become a place of profound sorrow. Official figures would later state that 77 people were killed and over 800 were injured, though many believe the true number of casualties was significantly higher. As the day wears on, the city is paralyzed. It feels as though a full-scale civil war has erupted. The government's decision to use force has backfired terribly. Instead of crushing the protests, it has created a wave of public anger and defiance. The students manage to take over several radio stations, and they begin to broadcast their own version of events, calling for the people of Bangkok to rise up against the military tyrants. For the first time, the people of Thailand were hearing two completely different, contradictory stories about what was happening in their own capital: the official, sanitized story from the government, and the desperate, passionate, and often chaotic story from the students. The truth, as is so often the case, was lost somewhere in the smoke and the noise. Historians still debate the precise chain of command during the crackdown. Was the order to fire on the protesters a deliberate and calculated decision made by the top military leaders, the Nam and Prophets? Or was it a case of a chaotic situation on the ground spinning out of control, a result of panic and a breakdown of discipline among the young, frightened soldiers? For you, the king, watching the events unfold from within the walls of your palace, the day is one of profound and agonizing decision. The violence in the streets is a direct challenge to the vow you made at your coronation, the promise to reign for the benefit and happiness of your people. Your children are killing each other. The military government, which you are constitutionally bound to support, is shooting the very students who are carrying your portrait as a symbol of the just and peaceful nation they are fighting for. The moral authority that you have so patiently and so carefully built over 2 decades of quiet, practical work in the countryside is now being called upon. It is a moment of immense and lonely weight. To act would be to step outside the bounds of your constitutional role and to directly defy the military government. To not act would be to stand by and allow your nation to descend into a full-blown civil war. As the violence reaches its peak in the late afternoon, it becomes clear that the government has lost control of the situation. The city is in chaos. The nation is on the brink of a catastrophe. The time for quiet, behind-the-scenes observation is over. The time for a decisive, public, and fatherly intervention has arrived. As the chaos and violence in the streets of Bangkok reached their terrible peak on the afternoon of October 14th, you, the king, made your decision. Your intervention was not a single grand political proclamation. It was a series of quiet, deliberate, and powerfully symbolic acts that would change the course of your nation's history. First, you acted with a gesture of profound and simple compassion. As thousands of panicked and unarmed student protesters were being pursued by the military through the streets surrounding the royal district, you gave a quiet order to the commander of your own palace guard. The great ornate gates of the Chitralada Palace, your own private royal residence, were to be opened. Imagine the scene. The terrified students, running for their lives, suddenly find the gates of the sacred, forbidden palace grounds swinging open for them. They pour inside, and the gates are closed behind them. In that single, simple act, you have provided them with a safe haven. You have taken them under your personal paternal protection. You have symbolically declared to the military and to the entire nation that these protesters are not the enemy. They are your children, and they are now guests in your home. It was a gesture of stunning moral clarity that the military, who claimed to be acting to protect the monarchy, could not ignore. Then, as evening fell over the still chaotic city, you took the second step. You went on national television and radio to address your people. The image broadcast across the nation was a powerful one. You are seated, dressed in a formal military uniform, your expression one of deep, solemn sorrow. You do not speak with anger or with the voice of a commander. You speak with the quiet, pained voice of a father. You do not explicitly condemn the military government. You do not explicitly side with the students. You rise above the politics of the conflict. You speak of your profound sadness at the day of great sorrow that has seen Thais killing Thais. You call for an end to all violence from all sides. And you ask your people as their father to come together in a spirit of peace and compromise to solve their own problems. Your use of a calm, indirect, and deeply moral language was a masterclass in Thai cultural communication. An angry denunciation might have been rejected by the proud military leaders. But the quiet, sorrowful disappointment of the revered father of the nation was a message that cut through the anger and the chaos, and it was a message that the Thai people, and even the generals, were culturally conditioned to respect and to obey. Political scientists still debate the precise nature of the king's power in this moment. Was his intervention a formal exercise of some hidden, constitutional reserve power? Or was it an act of purely charismatic and moral authority, a power that existed completely outside the written constitution, based entirely on the deep, almost religious, reverence that the Thai people held for him and the institution of the monarchy? The effect of your intervention was immediate and decisive. The fighting in the streets, which had raged all day, began to die down. The military, seeing that they had lost the moral high ground and the king's implicit support, began to pull their troops back. The three military leaders, the tyrannical trio, understood that their position was now completely untenable. The king's public address had stripped them of all their remaining legitimacy. A few hours after your broadcast, they quietly resigned their positions and boarded a plane, fleeing into exile. The military dictatorship, which had seemed so powerful just 24 hours earlier, had collapsed. The crisis ended as quickly as it began. Not with a final bloody battle for control of the city, but with a quiet, sad, and deeply respected speech on the television. The king's words, backed by the immense moral authority you had so patiently built over 2 decades, had proven to be more powerful than all the tanks and all the guns of the army. In the aftermath, you appointed a new civilian prime minister, and for a brief, hopeful period, Thailand was a democracy once again. You, the king, had successfully navigated your first great political crisis. And in doing so, you had cemented your modern role, not as a political ruler, but as the final moral arbiter of your nation. But the turbulent story of Thai politics is a cyclical one, and this would not be the last time that the father of the nation would be called upon to scold his feuding children. The brief, hopeful period of democracy that followed the 1973 uprising eventually gave way, as it so often did in Thai history, to another military coup and then another. The political landscape of Thailand remained a turbulent and often unstable one, a constant struggle between the forces of military authoritarianism and the aspirations of a growing democratic movement. The years passed. You, the king, continued your quiet, tireless work on your development projects, your moral authority growing ever deeper. You were the one constant, stable, and unifying presence in a nation of constant political change. And then, nearly 20 years after the first great test of your reign, in the spring of 1992, the nation once again found itself on the brink of a terrible and tragically familiar crisis. The story begins, as it so often does, with a military coup in 1991. The generals, led by a man named Suchinda Kriprayan, took power, promising to clean up corruption and hold new elections for a swift return to civilian rule. But after the elections were held, General Suchinda broke his promise. Despite not having run for office himself, he used his military backing and a coalition of pro-military political parties to have himself appointed as the new prime minister. The public reaction was one of profound outrage. It was seen as a cynical betrayal of the democratic process. And the people who took to the streets were not just the students of 1973. This was a new, broader, and more confident pro-democracy movement, representing the growing urban middle class of Bangkok. This was the protest of a new, more prosperous Thailand. The protesters had mobile phones and pagers. They were well organized, and they were deeply angry that their democratic votes had been rendered completely meaningless by a military strongman. The protests, centered again around the Democracy Monument, grew larger and more defiant day by day, drawing hundreds of thousands of people. They were led by a charismatic former general and governor of Bangkok, a man named Chamlong Srimuang, who was also a devout Buddhist and a powerful moral figure. His simple farmer's clothing and shaved head became a symbol of the movement's purity, and its defiance of the uniformed military. It was a horrifying echo of the past. The military government, seeing the massive crowds as a direct threat to its power, declared a state of emergency. And on the night of May 17, 1992, they decided to respond with force. The military opened fire on the unarmed protesters. For the next several days, the streets of Bangkok were once again a scene of chaos, violence, and tragedy. The event would become known as Black May. It seemed as if the nation was trapped in a terrible, repeating cycle of popular protest and brutal military repression. Political scientists still debate the reasons for this recurring cycle in modern Thai history. Is it a fundamental clash between a modernizing urban middle class that desires a Western-style democracy and a traditional, conservative military and bureaucratic elite that sees itself as the ultimate guardian of the nation and the only force capable of maintaining order and stability? As the violence in the streets escalated, and the nation once again seemed to be on the verge of a full-scale civil war, all eyes in Thailand turned to one place. In the midst of the chaos and the despair, the entire country, from the protesters in the streets to the soldiers in their barracks, was waiting and hoping that the father of the nation would intervene, just as he had done 19 years before. The pressure on you, the king, was immense. You were now in your 60s, a mature and universally revered monarch at the very peak of your moral authority. Your people were once again fighting, and they were looking to their father to make them stop. For several days, you remained silent. Then, as the crisis reached its deadliest point on the evening of May 20th, you acted. A message was sent from the palace. You, the king, were summoning both the military prime minister, General Suchinda, and the leader of the pro-democracy movement, Chamlong Srimuang, to an immediate and urgent audience. The stage was now set for what would become the single most iconic and dramatic political intervention of your entire 70-year reign. The summons from the king is a command that cannot be refused. On the night of May 20, 1992, the two men at the heart of the crisis, the powerful military prime minister, General Suchinda Kriprayun, and the revered pro-democracy leader, Chamlong Srimuang, are brought to the palace. They are led into a grand audience hall, and they are told that their meeting with the king will be broadcast live to the entire nation. The image that appears on television screens across Thailand is one of the most powerful and iconic in the country's modern history. It is a scene of profound and ancient ceremony, layered with intense modern political drama. You, the king, are seated in an ornate chair, dressed in your formal robes. Beside you sit two of your most senior and respected privy councillors, and on the floor before you, prostrated in the traditional gesture of utmost reverence, their heads bowed to the carpet, are the two rival leaders. General Suchinda, the man who commands the army, is in his crisp white military uniform. Chamlong Srimuang, the man who commands the protesters in the streets, is in his simple blue farmer's tunic. One man holds all the military power, the other all the popular power. But in this room, they are both just subjects, kneeling on the floor before their king. The visual statement before a single word is spoken is one of absolute and unquestionable moral authority. Then you begin to speak, and the nation falls silent to listen. Your tone is not one of anger. You do not shout or issue commands. You speak with a quiet, calm, and deeply sorrowful voice. It is the voice of a father, expressing his profound disappointment in his two feuding children, who have brought shame and violence to the family home. Is there any point in a victory when the only thing left is the rubble of a ruined nation? You ask them, your voice gentle but firm. You do not take sides. You do not assign blame. You simply speak of the damage that their confrontation is doing to the country, to its people, to its economy, and to its reputation in the world. You ask them to turn to each other, to talk to each other, and to find a peaceful solution to the problems that divide them. It is a masterclass in exercising authority without appearing authoritarian. You are not ordering them to stop. You are appealing to their sense of duty and their shared identity as Thais, expressing your paternal disappointment in their failure to act with wisdom and compassion. In the deeply hierarchical and respectful culture of Thailand, this is a far more powerful and effective form of command than any direct order could ever be. The two powerful men on the floor can only listen in silence, their heads bowed. They are publicly and profoundly chastened. The anger and the violence of the streets seem to melt away in the face of this quiet, sorrowful, and irresistible moral force. It is one of the most surreal and powerful political broadcasts of all time. It is not a debate. It is a lecture. A very quiet, very polite, and very firm lecture from the father of the nation to his two most troublesome sons. With the entire country watching, political scientists see this event as the absolute peak of your moral authority, a perfect demonstration of the network monarchy in action. But they also debate its long-term consequences. Did this powerful intervention, while it undoubtedly saved lives and ended the immediate crisis, also reinforce a precedent that political disputes in Thailand should ultimately be solved not by democratic processes, but by the extra-constitutional intervention of the monarch? Did it, in the long run, weaken the very democratic institutions it sought to protect? The broadcast ends. A stunned silence hangs over the entire nation. The television screens go dark. Everyone in Thailand, from the protesters behind their barricades to the soldiers in their barracks, waits to see what will happen next. Will the two men, having been so publicly and so paternally admonished, heed their king's words? The broadcast ends, leaving a stunned silence in its wake, not just in the palace audience hall, but in every home, every shop, and every street corner across the entire kingdom of Thailand. The nation, which had been teetering on the very brink of a full-scale civil war, collectively holds its breath, waiting to see what will happen next. The effect of your intervention is almost immediate and almost magical. In the streets of Bangkok, the leader of the pro-democracy movement, Chamlong Srimuang, having left the palace, speaks to his supporters. He announces that the king has expressed his deep concern for the nation, and that in deference to the king's wishes, the protests will now end. He asks his hundreds of thousands of followers to disperse peacefully and go home. At the same time, the military, having witnessed their commander being publicly and paternally chastened by the monarch, has lost all of its moral legitimacy to continue the crackdown. The orders are given for the troops to pull back, to return to their barracks. The violence, which had raged for days, simply stops. The angry, shouting crowds melt away. The soldiers disappear from the streets. A quiet, almost dazed, sense of peace returns to the city. It was a remarkable demonstration of soft power. You had no army at your back. You had no formal, constitutional authority to issue a direct order to either side. All you had was the immense, intangible weight of your moral authority as the respected father of the nation. And in this moment, it proved to be more powerful than any army. In the days that followed, the political resolution unfolded swiftly. General Suchinda, his position now completely untenable, resigned as prime minister and for a time left the country. To oversee the transition, the king, appointed a respected civilian, Anand Panurakan, as an interim prime minister. His government was tasked with amending the constitution to ensure that all future prime ministers must be elected members of parliament, the very issue that had sparked the crisis in the first place. The two privy councillors who sat silently beside you during the televised broadcast were also a crucial part of the message. Their presence signaled that your intervention was not a personal whim, but a considered act that had the full backing of the kingdom's most senior and respected elder statesmen. It was a masterstroke of political theater, designed to show a unified front of traditional moral authority. Political analysts still debate the long-term impact of this royal intervention model of crisis management. Does it create a stable political system, with the monarchy acting as a crucial safety valve to be used in the most extreme circumstances? Or does it create a kind of dependency, where the political and military actors are always looking to the palace to solve their problems for them, rather than developing their own stable institutional methods of compromise and power sharing? But in the immediate aftermath of Black May 1992, the feeling in Thailand was one of overwhelming relief and profound gratitude. The nation had stepped back from the abyss. The memory of the violence would be a painful one for years to come, but the memory of your decisive intervention would be one of deep and abiding reverence. Once again, the father of the nation had brought his fighting children together, and with a quiet, sorrowful word, had made them stop. You had fulfilled your coronation vow, restoring peace for the benefit and happiness of your people. You were now, more than ever, the indispensable moral center of the Thai world. The 1990s, following this crisis, would become a period of relative democratic stability and unprecedented economic growth for Thailand. But the world was changing. A new century was about to dawn, and with it would come a new, more complex, and more deeply polarizing kind of political conflict, a conflict that would test the very limits of your immense moral authority, and challenge the father of the nation in a way that no crisis had before. The 1990s, after the trauma of Black May, passed in a period of relative calm, democratic progress, and economic prosperity for Thailand. It seemed as if the nation had finally broken its long and painful cycle of coups and crises. But as the 21st century dawned, a new figure emerged in Thai politics, a figure who would inspire both intense, passionate devotion and deep, visceral opposition. He would create a new kind of political crisis, one that was deeper, more complex, and more difficult to solve than any that had come before. His name was Thaksin Shinawatra. That he was a new kind of leader for Thailand. He was not a general from the army or a bureaucrat from the old Bangkok elite. He was a telecommunications billionaire, a tycoon who had made his fortune in the new globalized economy, and he was a brilliant populist. In the election of 2001, he campaigned not on the usual abstract promises, but on a series of concrete, popular policies aimed directly at the country's vast, and often neglected rural and working-class majority. He promised things like universal health care for just 30 baht per hospital visit, and a development fund of 1 million baht for every single village in the country. He won in a landslide. And crucially, he delivered on his promises. For the first time in their history, the rural poor of the North and Northeast felt they had a political leader who spoke directly to them, who cared about their lives, and who gave them tangible benefits. They gave him their absolute, unwavering loyalty. But this same man was viewed with deep suspicion and hostility by the traditional elites in Bangkok, the urban middle class, the old aristocratic families, the military, and the palace bureaucracy. They saw him as corrupt, as an authoritarian who abused his power, and most dangerously of all, as a threat to the traditional social and political order of the kingdom. They feared he was building a personal political machine that could one day challenge the supreme moral authority of the monarchy itself. This was a new and much more dangerous kind of conflict. It was not a simple case of the military versus pro-democracy students. This was a deep, fundamental, and almost tribal division within Thai society itself, a class-based and regional conflict between two groups of people who had two very different visions for the future of their country. As this new crisis took shape, you, the king, found yourself in a much more difficult and delicate position than ever before. In the crises of 1973 and 1992, the moral lines were relatively clear. But now, both sides in this bitter new struggle were mass popular movements. And both sides claimed to be acting out of a deep and abiding loyalty to you and to the institution of the monarchy. The anti-Thaksin protesters, who organized themselves into the Yellow Shirt movement, chose the color yellow precisely because it is the color associated with Monday, the day of your birth. They explicitly branded themselves as the ultimate defenders of the throne. But the pro-Thaksin supporters, who would become the Red Shirts, also always carried your portrait and that of the Queen at their rallies, insisting that they, too, were loyal subjects who were simply fighting for their democratically elected leader. It was a deeply confusing situation. Both sides in this bitter political war were waving your portrait and claiming to be your most loyal children. As the father of the nation, how could you choose between two of your own feuding family members? Any intervention would be seen as taking a side and would risk alienating half of your subjects. Political scientists who study this period see it as the greatest challenge to your traditional role as a unifying moral arbiter. In a deeply polarized society where both sides claim your support, does the monarch's intervention become almost impossible? The crisis escalated for years until in 2006, the military once again stepped in. While Thaksin was out of the country, they launched a bloodless coup, removing him from power. But this time, the coup did not bring stability. It was celebrated by the Yellow Shirts in Bangkok, but it was seen as an unforgivable crime by the millions of Red Shirt supporters in the countryside. The coup did not solve the division. It only deepened it and set the stage for years of even more intense confrontation. The familiar cycle of Thai politics had returned, but this time, the wound in the nation's soul seemed deeper and more difficult to heal. The 2006 military coup, which was intended to restore order and end the political crisis, did the exact opposite. It did not heal the nation's divisions, it set them in stone. The coup locked the country into a long, painful, and often violent cycle of political conflict that would dominate the next decade. This was the era that became known in Thailand and around the world as the Battle of the Colors. Imagine the city of Bangkok during these years. It is no longer just a bustling modern metropolis. It is now a permanent stage for a vast and seemingly endless political drama. The city became a place of semi-permanent protest camps, vast seas of tents and flags and passionate people that would spring up for months at a time, paralyzing the city's commercial and governmental heart. When a government backed by the pro-Thaksin parties was in power, the Yellow Shirts would take to the streets. They would occupy government ministries and, in their most famous and disruptive protest in 2008, they even occupied and shut down Bangkok's 2 international airports for over a week. And when a government backed by the traditional royalist establishment was in power, the Red Shirts would descend on the capital from the countryside. They would create their own massive protest camps, bringing the city to a standstill with their demands for new elections. The city learned to live with this strange new reality. Your daily commute might be blocked by a vast sea of yellow tents one month, and a vast sea of red flags the next. Politics was no longer something that happened in Parliament. It was a loud, colorful, and deeply disruptive festival in the streets. While these protests often had a peaceful and even festive atmosphere, they frequently erupted into violence. There were clashes between the protesters and the security forces, and sometimes between the rival political groups themselves. The most tragic of these events came in 2010, when a prolonged Red Shirt protest was brought to an end by a brutal military crackdown that left more than 90 people dead in the streets of Bangkok. And throughout this long, painful period of turmoil, you, the king, are now in your 80s and in increasingly fragile health. You spend much of your time in Siraj Hospital, and the entire nation watches anxiously for any news of your condition. And they watch and wait for you to intervene, to perform the same kind of decisive, healing magic that you did in 1973 and 1992. But this crisis was different. In the past, the conflicts had been relatively clear-cut. A struggle between an unelected military dictatorship and a popular pro-democracy movement. Your role as a father siding with his children was clear. But now the conflict was between two massive popular movements, between two large groups of your own children. To side with the Yellow Shirts would be to reject the democratic will of the millions of rural voters who supported the Red Shirts. To side with the Red Shirts would be to alienate the powerful urban establishment that had always been the staunchest and most loyal supporter of the monarchy. The family was too deeply and too evenly divided for the father to be able to fix the argument. Sociologists who study protest movements debate the long-term effects of this era of street politics. Did it represent a new and powerful form of popular democracy, giving a real voice to ordinary people who felt they were not being heard? Or did it ultimately damage the country's democratic institutions by creating a culture of permanent crisis, making the nation ungovernable, and paving the way for the military to inevitably step in once again? Faced with this new, impossibly complex and intractable crisis, your role began to change. The decisive, public interventions of the past were no longer possible. Instead, your influence became quieter, more subtle, and far more symbolic, a reflection of your own declining health and the nation's deepening divisions. Faced with this new, seemingly unsolvable crisis that divided his people so deeply against each other, your style of intervention had to change. You were now an aging monarch in your late 70s and early 80s. The dramatic, decisive, and public acts of your middle years were replaced by a new, much quieter, more subtle, and often more cryptic form of royal guidance. Your main platform for this was your annual birthday speech, broadcast live on television and radio every 4th of December. These speeches became major national events, required viewing for the entire country. And in a nation paralyzed by political conflict, everyone, from the prime minister to the street vendor, from the red shirt protester to the yellow shirt activist, would listen to your words, searching for guidance, for meaning, and for any hint of which side you might favor. But you rarely, if ever, addressed the political conflict directly. Instead, you spoke in parables. You would tell a long, rambling, and often quite funny story about one of your development projects, or about a problem with the water pressure in the palace, but the story would be a clear, if indirect, allegory for the political situation. It was a strange and unique form of political communication. The most important political speech of the year was one that never actually mentioned politics. You might speak for 10 minutes about the importance of using good water to flush out and replace bad water in a polluted canal, and the entire country would understand that you were talking about the need for good people and good governance to drive out corruption from the political system. It was a national exercise in reading between the lines. The cryptic and gentle nature of these speeches, however, meant that they were a double-edged sword. Because you never took an explicit side, both the red shirts and the yellow shirts would immediately seize upon your words and interpret them in a way that supported their own cause. If you spoke of the need for national unity, the yellow shirts would claim you were calling on the red shirts to stop their divisive protests. If you spoke of the need to listen to the people, the red shirts would claim you were sending a message to the establishment to respect the results of the elections. And one of your most famous and beloved speeches from this era, you spent a great deal of time talking, with genuine affection and humor, about your favorite pet dog, a stray named Tong Ding. You praised the dog for her loyalty, her humility, and her good manners. The entire nation listened, captivated, and many interpreted the speech as a subtle, allegorical critique of the squabbling, self-interested, and ill-mannered politicians who were causing so much trouble in the country. It is a truly remarkable thing when a king can have a greater political impact by talking about his dog than most politicians can have by talking about policy. It showed how much the Thai people were desperately searching for simple moral wisdom in a time of complex political chaos. Scholars of Thai politics debate the effectiveness of this indirect approach. Was your use of cryptic allegory a masterful way to maintain your position above politics, to preserve the monarchy as a unifying symbol while still offering moral guidance to the nation? Or was it a sign of your declining ability to influence events, a reflection of the fact that the political divisions had become so deep and so bitter that a direct intervention, like the one in 1992, was no longer possible without shattering the monarchy's carefully guarded reputation for neutrality? In 1973 and 1992, you were a father, stepping in to stop a fight between your children. In the 2000s, you were more like a grandfather, sitting in your chair, telling a quiet, allegorical story with a moral at the end, hoping that your warring grandchildren would finally listen and understand. But the divisions, it seemed, were too deep to be healed by parables alone. the battle of the colors would continue to rage for years, a cycle of protests, elections, and political turmoil, culminating in yet another military coup in 2014. And you, in the final years of your long reign, now largely confined to the hospital, were forced to watch as the country you had given your life to remain trapped in its painful cycle of conflict. The political turmoil of the nation, the seemingly endless battle of the colors, now unfolds in parallel with the quiet, personal battle of your own advancing age and declining health. The final chapter of your long reign is not spent in the golden ceremonial halls of the Grand Palace, but in a quiet, sterile, and specially equipped suite on the 16th floor of Siriraj Hospital in Bangkok. In 2009, you are admitted to the hospital for a respiratory condition, and this would, with a few brief exceptions, become your permanent home for the final 7 years of your life. The hospital, an old and respected institution on the banks of the Chao Phraya River, becomes the new de facto center of the Thai monarchy. And as you retreat from the public eye into the quiet world of medical care, your people come to you. The area outside Siriraj Hospital is transformed into a kind of permanent, informal shrine. Day after day, year after year, ordinary Thai people gather. They come to lay flowers, to light candles, and to pray for your health. They often wear the color pink, a color that astrologers had suggested would be good for your health. They hold up portraits of you and they sing royal anthems. For decades, you traveled to the farthest corners of your kingdom to be with your people. In your final years, your people came to be with you. They could not see you. They could only be near the building that housed you. It was a long, quiet, and deeply moving national vigil, a testament to the profound and personal bond you had forged with them over a lifetime of tireless work. On the rare occasions that you would leave the hospital, perhaps for a short visit to one of the nearby palaces, the event was a major national moment. The television news would broadcast live, and tens of thousands of people would line the streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of their beloved king. The image they saw was a powerful and poignant one. It was not the vigorous development king of their memories, striding through a rice paddy with a map and a camera. It was an elderly, frail, and serious man, often in a wheelchair, his face etched with the lines of age and illness. The sight of their king's frailty created a deep and pervasive sense of national anxiety. You had been the one single stable anchor in the turbulent sea of Thai society for over 60 years. Your image was a symbol of constancy and order. Your declining health, therefore, was a profound and unsettling reminder that this long era, the only era that almost anyone in the country could remember, was coming to an end. Sociologists refer to this period as a time of great national uncertainty. What would Thailand be like without its father? It was a question that haunted the nation. During these long years in the hospital, one of your most constant and famous companions was your favorite dog, Tong Ding. The stories and official photographs of the aging king with his faithful, intelligent dog were incredibly popular. In a time of such great political division and uncertainty, the simple, quiet image of the king and his loyal dog was a powerful symbol of enduring, uncomplicated affection. It was a story everyone could understand. In the early autumn of 2016, the Royal Household Bureau begins to issue more frequent and more serious public statements about your health. The language is formal and indirect, but the meaning is clear. The king's long sunset is approaching its final twilight. The crowds outside the hospital grow larger. A deep, quiet, and profound sense of sorrow begins to settle over the entire nation. The king's reign must, like all things, come to an end. But for a king who has reigned for 70 years, for a king who is the only monarch that almost anyone in the country had ever known, the end of the reign feels like the end of an entire world. It is a future that no one is truly ready to face. And then on the evening of October 13, 2016, the final solemn announcement is made. King Bhumibol Adulyadej the Great has passed away peacefully. A great profound silence falls over the Kingdom of Thailand. The announcement of the king's death on October 13, 2016, is a moment that an entire generation of Thais will never forget. A profound sense of loss, a quiet, personal, and yet universally shared grief sweeps across the entire nation. The political divisions, the angry colors of the red shirts and the yellow shirts, all of it seems to melt away, replaced by a single shared identity of sorrow. The father of the nation is gone. Imagine you are in Bangkok in the days and weeks that follow. The city is transformed. It is as if all the color has been drained from the world. The people in the streets, on the Skitran, in the great shopping malls, almost everyone is voluntarily dressed in simple somber black or white. The massive, vibrant, and colorful billboards that usually advertise phones and beauty products are replaced with monochrome portraits of the late king. Television channels switch their logos to black and white. Websites and social media feeds become a uniform river of black. This was the beginning of one of the largest and longest periods of national mourning in modern history. The government declared an official mourning period for 1 full year, and the Thai people embraced it with a quiet and solemn dedication. It was a quiet, voluntary, and almost universal act. It was not a command that was strictly enforced upon the general public. It was a shared, unspoken agreement. The entire nation was wearing its heart on its sleeve, and its heart was broken. The vibrant, colorful land of smiles had become a land of quiet, monochrome sorrow. You witnessed the great procession that carries the king's body from Siraj Hospital back to the Grand Palace. The streets are lined 10 deep with millions of mourners, all dressed in black, sitting silently and respectfully on the pavement. The only sound is the low murmur of prayers and the sound of weeping as the royal convoy passes. The king's body is placed in a magnificent golden urn in the Duzit Mahaprasit throne hall, where it will lie in state for a full year, allowing his people to come and pay their final respects. This was a period of mourning that took place in the 21st century, and so it had a modern dimension. Thais all over the world, from Los Angeles to London, changed their social media profile pictures to black squares or to portraits of the king. Facebook and Instagram, usually platforms for bright, happy moments, became quiet spaces for sharing old photographs of the king's life and work, and for expressing a shared sense of loss. It was a digital vigil, a modern expression of a very ancient form of grief. Sociologists and political scientists still debate the full nature of this immense outpouring of sorrow. Was it purely a spontaneous expression of personal love and grief for a beloved father figure who had been a part of their lives for their entire lives? Or was it also a more complex social phenomenon, a performance of national unity and loyalty in a time of profound political uncertainty? Was it a way for a deeply divided nation to come together, to heal its own wounds by focusing on the one single symbol of unity they all shared? The year of mourning was a year of national reflection. Life went on, but with a constant, quiet undercurrent of remembrance. Joyful music was muted, festivals were canceled or toned down, and television channels every single day would broadcast programs about the king's life, showing old black and white footage of his journeys into the countryside, of his development projects, of his meetings with his people. It was a year-long process of the entire nation looking back, trying to comprehend the sheer scale and impact of the 70-year reign that had so completely defined their modern identity. It was a long, slow, and deeply sad goodbye as the year of mourning draws to a close. The nation prepares for the final, magnificent, and heartbreaking ceremony, the royal cremation. It will be the last act of this long and historic reign, a final moment of spectacle and farewell for the father of the nation. The year of mourning comes to its end, and in October of 2017, 1 year after your passing, the nation and the world watch as the final, magnificent, and deeply sorrowful royal cremation ceremony is held. A vast, temporary, and exquisitely beautiful golden crematorium, representing the mythical Mount Meru, has been built in the heart of Bangkok. It is a spectacle of ancient ritual, a final fiery farewell to the 9th king of the Chakri dynasty, and with that, the 70-year reign of King Bhumibol Adulyadej, the Great, comes to its true and final close. To look back on such a long and consequential reign is to look back on the entire story of modern Thailand. You came to the throne as a young, hesitant, and grief-stricken student in a nation recovering from a world war. And you left it as a deeply beloved, almost mythical figure, the single, unwavering point of stability in a world of constant, dizzying change. Your reign was defined, above all, by the quiet, simple vow you took at your coronation. We will reign with righteousness for the benefit and happiness of the Siamese people. It was this promise that took you out of the palaces and into the poorest, most remote corners of your kingdom. It was this promise that led you to put your scientific mind to work solving the practical problems of your people, to become the development king, the royal rainmaker, and it was this promise that compelled you, at moments of profound national crisis, to step into the dangerous world of politics, not as a ruler, but as a moral arbiter, a father figure whose quiet, sorrowful words could stop armies and calm a nation on the brink of civil war. Historians and political scientists will, for generations to come, debate the complexities of your long reign. They will analyze the unique nature of your power, the structure of the network monarchy that surrounded you, and the long-term effects of your interventions on Thailand's difficult path towards a stable democracy. But for the vast majority of the Thai people, your legacy is not one of political complexity. It is the simple, powerful, and enduring image of the father of the nation. It is the memory of the king with a camera always around his neck and a map spread out on the ground. The king who walked through the muddy water of the rice paddies. The king who sat on the floor of a simple wooden house and listened, for hours, to the problems of the poorest farmers. That is the image that endures. And it is why, even today, Father's Day in Thailand is celebrated on your birthday, December 5th. And it is this gentle image of the father of the nation that we will end with tonight. Our long story of your remarkable life is now complete. The memory of the young prince's saxophone drifting through a quiet Swiss town, the sound of the ancient coronation chants in the grand palace, the sight of the king walking patiently through a dry field, and the quiet, fatherly voice that calmed a nation, all of these can now begin to soften and fade into the deep, quiet respect of history. The long reign has come to its peaceful close. The nation has said its final, sorrowful goodbye. The story is over, and now you can rest.